X-Men movie series had been going great for a couple of years. X-Men 1 and 2 were brilliant and was a fantastic example of how to do a superhero movie properly. But it all started to go downhill when the trilogy limped to the finish with X-Men 3: The Last Stand. It was clear after this that the X-Men film franchise needed a boot up the backside to get going again, or even a reboot. X-Men First Class gives us a prequel set in the 60s, before mutant academies and male pattern baldness setting. This film details the beginning and the end of the friendship between Professor Charles Xavier, played by James McAvoy, and Eric Lehnsherr, played by Michael Fassbender. This film opens up very much like the first X-Men movie did, in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany-occupied Poland in 1944. In fact, they used exactly the same film footage as they did from X-Men 1. This didn't exactly give me a good first impression. I was thinking, oh god, don't tell me it's going to be one of those movies where they just keep repeating footage from the previous movies. But luckily it got better from there, as we then saw what happened to the young Eric Lehnsherr shortly after those events. As Nazi scientist Dr. Klaus Schmidt, played by a suitably sneering Kevin Bacon, torments the young boy into unleashing his mutant powers of magnetism, with the idea of using him as a weapon. In doing so, this plants the seed of hatred against humanity within the man who would later become Magneto. So in a way, Schmidt is Dr. Frankenstein, and Lehnsherr is his monster. Fast forward to the swinging 60s, and Schmidt is now a businessman going by the name of Sebastian Shaw. He hasn't aged at all, mainly due to the fact that he too is a mutant. Shaw is trying to orchestrate the Cuban Missile Crisis for his own evil agenda. And during this time, Charles Xavier and Eric Lehnsherr meet each other for the first time and start putting together a team of mutants to stop Shaw and prevent World War III from kicking off. During this time, we see some familiar faces making their first chronological appearance, including Beast, played by Nicholas Hoult, and Mystique, played by Jennifer Lawrence. We also get to see the James Bond girl-esque Emma Frost, played by January Jones. Speaking of James Bond, this is certainly not like any of the other X-Men movies. In fact, this is more like a James Bond movie from the 60s that had an element of sci-fi to it. There's some great performances throughout the movie, but for me, whenever Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy appeared on screen, they just owned this movie, whether they appeared on screen together or on their own. I also thought that Jennifer Lawrence, as Mystique, portrayed the love triangle between herself, Xavier and Magneto very well, showing that she was equally drawn to both men and to both their points of view.
You want society to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself.
Although this is a great movie and it does give the X-Men franchise the much needed kick up the backside that it deserves, it isn't perfect by any means. Okay, first of all, the makeup on Beast is a huge step down from X-Men 3: The Last Stand, and it looks ridiculous. And it gets even worse when he starts talking. Also, I've got a few issues with the way that Mystique is depicted here. Although Jennifer Lawrence played the character brilliantly and, as mentioned before, really sold that conflicting love triangle between herself, Xavier and Magneto, I have to say this. Mystique is Charles Xavier's adopted sister? What? Mystique is an original member of the X-Men? What? That just doesn't seem right to me. Also, if Mystique is Xavier's adopted sister, and he's pretty much brought her in off the streets and looked after her for most of her life, what sense does it make that shortly after Charles is paralysed after getting hit in the spine by a stray bullet, that she leaves him to go with Magneto? Surely she would stay with her brother at a time when he needs her the most? Another issue here is that the special effects used for Mystique's transformations are a huge step down from the previous X-Men movies. In fact, a lot of the special effects in this movie look a bit dodgy, to be honest. The only exception to this is whenever Magneto uses his mutant powers of magnetism. Now that still looked excellent. Also, there's times when the film doesn't seem to fit in with the continuity of any of the other X-Men movies. Okay, so Hugh Jackman has an uncredited cameo appearance as Wolverine where he basically tells Charles and Eric to fuck off, which I thought was brilliant and worth the price of admission alone. And we also get to see how Magneto acquired his signature helmet, and even how Xavier ended up in a wheelchair. But if you remember in the first X-Men movie, Xavier mentioned that Magneto helped him build Cerebro. Now, that doesn't happen here. Now, you would have thought that it would have made sense for the two friends to have built Cerebro together within the confines of Xavier's mansion during the training montages, and before the final battle, which leads to them parting ways. But no, that doesn't happen. In fact, they didn't even build Cerebro at all. This was done by the CIA's Division X facility. Okay, well at some point they're going to have to install Cerebro within Xavier's mansion, so hopefully this is something that will get covered in the sequel. And yes, it is left open for a sequel at the end.
Friends, there's a revolution coming. When mankind discovers who we are, what we can do, each of us will face a choice. Be enslaved, or rise up to rule. Choose freely, but know that if you are not with us, then by definition you are against us.
But hey, you know what? Even with all this nitpicking, I would still highly recommend X-Men First Class. Just as long as you realise that this feels like a very different film from the last four. But overall, the Big Daddy D will give X-Men First Class a resounding thumbs up.